Welcome to episode 4 of Meet the Ocean.
Meet the ocean!
I'm your host, Paul North, and if you've been listening along with us and you've heard about the wandering albatross, penguins in the Antarctic, and killer whales in the Southern Ocean, each one of those creatures is pretty fantastic, but I wouldn't know nearly as much about them if I didn't have the job that I do. So I figure it's time we talk about cold water diving. Cold water diving. I work as an undersea specialist, which is kind of a funky job title. It implies that I know everything there is to know about what lurks beneath the waterline, which is absolutely 100% true. Or at least it will be once I get done reading all the books on my shelf. Where I work is not one place. Instead, it's aboard a fleet of ships with Lindblad Expeditions and National Geographic. And we go all around the world, exploring some of the most dynamic ecosystems on our planet. And my job is to go diving. With my waterproof camera in hand, I search for the most dynamic life I can find, and I bring it back to example to the guests we have on board. Sort of a, this is what was happening under the ship when you were on shore kind of vibe. The thing is, our ships spend more than half the year in the polar regions, which means that when we go diving, we are doing so in sub-freezing conditions. Cold water is not a North American wetsuit dive. Those temperatures are endurable, at least for a time. Polar water is not. As you increase in latitude and head towards the poles, ocean temperatures lose their forgiveness. In these waters, the human body shuts down after only a few minutes of exposure. We're talking about some slap you in the face cold.
Ow!
It doesn't really matter what you're wearing. Your brain kind of revolts the moment you jump in. So obviously, it takes a certain sort of person to give polar diving a try. And out of the few that do, even less choose to continue to pursue it. But some hear the call, and I've called 2 of them today to describe all the nitty-gritty details of what it's like to dive amongst the ice. It's cold.
Meet the ocean!
I'm Caitlyn Webster. I am a scientific diver that has made the transition from temperate to tropical to polar diving. And right now, I would say the majority of my diving happens at either pole, where it is logistically much more difficult than jumping in with a rash guard and 1 pound. However, it is a thrill and a rush that I prefer to go diving in the poles because it's so unique and simply amazing.
I'm Robert Alexander, and I am a polar diver, or one of the many things I do. I first started diving in the polar regions, I think it was in 2008, and I dove mostly with Lisa Kelly and Dennis Cornejo, of all people, and got hooked, and still do it today. It's been fun.
Let's see, my first polar dive was up in Svalbard, and I remember going from diving in a dry suit in California, where, yeah, you'll get cold after doing a 100-meter transect for an hour and a half. Then you get very cold. But in polar regions, I found it to be this hilariously novel experience where you jump in and you feel like $1 million because
The adrenaline.
you're so excited and you're toasty warm and you're like, oh yeah, this is gonna last forever, this is awesome. And you're cruising around, and at about minute 5 you realize, oh my jeebus, this is the coldest I've ever been in my whole life.
Minute 5? Mine's about 30 seconds.
And then by minute 22, you think
I'm gonna
you're
die.
going to die. And if there's just 1 ounce of mental restraint that you can find within yourself to hang in there, then you're gonna hang in there just to hopefully see something else super awesome. But certainly the toes and the fingers, for me, go instantly so fast those get cold. Whereas when you first splash in, it's like dumping an ice bucket on your face, and your face numbs up pretty quick.
Yeah, the face doesn't
that's
bother.
Zero bother. It's like, okay, that's cold now, moving on. Whereas the fingers and the toes, it almost is a burning sensation, but a freezing burning sensation, to the point where as a mammal, your blood is rushing away from your extremities, and so it hurts. It doesn't feel good. Your blood's not used to or supposed to really do that, and yet we're subjecting ourselves to this frigid water for
intentionally.
Yeah, most people would be like, that's crazy, which it is. But I'm okay with that. And then when you get out of the water, for me, it's actually even worse, because then the blood starts to come back, and it sucks.
Yeah.
It hurts really bad.
It takes me a while to be able to walk, even. Like, I stumble up the stairs, tripping all over myself, because I've got no feeling in my feet and my toes.
Nope. Even when I'm in the shower, I'll be like thumping my foot to try and get feeling back to it, and it's just, no matter how hot the water is, it's just gone. It's just like not a part of my body anymore. It's just this phantom leg now. And it will not come back to life for hours sometimes.
Some contracts, I didn't get all the feeling back in my fingers for weeks after I got home.
Nah, that's scary.
Yeah. Fortunately, I have all the feeling in my fingers now, but it's possible to do permanent nerve damage. I mean, people have done it.
Yeah.
It's cold and it's painful, but
we love it.
Yeah, but we love it.
But it's totally worth it. There's never been a point where I've been like, oh, I don't want to get in, it's cold. And that will prohibit me from actually getting in the water. I might say that, but I never actually
follow through with
believe that, because the rush and excitement and discovery within polar diving is exponentially worth any temporary physical
discomfort
pain or discomfort.
I might sometimes internally curse my dive partner to be finished already and it's time to go up, but never actually. That's just an internal thing when I'm really cold.
I'll curse myself sometimes too. While I'm videotaping, I'm like,
please be done. Please be done. Please
I wish time would move faster while I'm filming this limpet. But no!
You can't rush a limpet.
You can't rush a limpet.
Now, doesn't all that just sound real comfortable? Yeah, right. And yet, you can hear Kaitlin and Robert still remain quite chipper on the topic. Seeing how I have had the pleasure of diving with both of them, I wanted them to describe to you the feeling of what happens underwater. Because no matter how much you wear or how well designed the equipment is, your body is still undergoing a great deal of change. And it's not exactly comfortable.
Meet the ocean.
Your cheeks, your lips, maybe part of the area around your mask, and there's a small section of your neck that's actually exposed too, which a lot of first-time polar divers will talk about the ice cream headache effect. I think it's because the water that's so cold, there's no thermal protection in your neck, so that water hits your carotid arteries, that cooled blood just goes straight to your head, and you get that kind of ice cream headache-like effect. But to answer your question about the lips, they are exposed. They swell up tremendously, and it makes it difficult to talk when you get out of the water. Not that we're talking a whole lot immediately, but it's quite the sight.
Your brain definitely gets cold quickly, as does the rest of your body, but you have to be able to recognize when you do hit that threshold within brain freeze of, can I still make rational decisions, which goes into making a call between your safety but also diving safety with your partner, because you never know how you're going to react, but usually once you get more experienced, you can have a pretty good idea of how long you can last, how cold you can get before you start losing your ability to make snap judgments that are good calls in the long run. But
not just that, but operate the equipment. I mean,
yes.
When you start to get so cold that your hands stop functioning, usually it's good to kind of get out. If you can't use the emergency equipment, that's, for me at least, that's an indicator that it's probably time to get out of the water.
Get up.
Just try
get
to warm
up. Get some hot cocoa.
Oh, it's cold. Wait, is that a leak? I think my suit has a leak. Oh God! Oh God! Oh, that's a leak. Oh, all right. Oh, okay. Dives over.
The experiencing of gearing up into our polar dive gear is surprisingly hot. You can build up quite a sweat putting on all of your different layers. So we start out with underlayers of wool and
Very
long
synthetics.
johns. Yes, basically things that will keep us warm underneath our jumpsuit that is much comparable to a sleeping bag.
Or a fleece onesie.
A fleece onesie, yes. Same. And all of that basically is going to keep us nice and toasty in between the water suit air interface. And I usually wear about 2, maybe 3 socks on each foot, depending on when and where.
To keep us toasty in theory.
To delay the effects of hypothermia setting in. So that all goes on underneath a dry suit, which is essentially comparable to maybe a spacesuit in that it is completely contained and it has seals on your neck and your hands, and then everything else is within this very durable, almost rubber-like synthetic material that doesn't allow any water, in theory, to touch your body. So then we wear different types of gloves, depending on who it is, but also supposed to have a type of glove, basically, that goes underneath, and you lose a heck of a lot of dexterity because the gloves are so robust. However, you delay the cold from creeping in a lot longer than if you were wearing something like a wetsuit, where you just have this thick layer of neoprene between the water and your body. However, that's what we wear on our heads, is usually a 10 to 7 millimeter neoprene hood, and it makes things pretty difficult to hear, and it certainly keeps your head very, very warm. So we put that on certainly last, but that is just the warm, quote-unquote, protection layer.
That's the thermal protection layer.
Yes.
I think of it as, if you've ever seen the movie A Christmas Story, it's very much like Randy Parker when he's getting dressed up to go to school. He's like, I can't put my arms down. he's like a little tick that's about to pop. But yeah, it's very similar to that.
Typically the water's very, very murky, and you never can really know what you're going to see. And so I think the proponents of not necessarily knowing what you're going to see, you're diving in a place that probably not a heck of a lot of other people have been diving in. And it can be dark, low visibility, you might see some penguins, you might see nothing but limpets. And I think the mystery and the severe cold creates this challenge, but also
an excitement.
An excitement as a professional diver.
It's an excitement of exploration too, because quite realistically, we are diving in places that no one has ever been and no one has ever seen before. So to be able to put that on a map and log it and say we dove here and we're the first ones, that's exciting too. And I think that's a huge draw, because there's not many unexplored places left in the world, and to be somebody who's the first to be somewhere, I think that's pretty unique as well.
Humans. We are creatures who, so to speak, originated from the ocean, and we certainly rely on the ocean, and water in general, for food and oxygen. The question is, how much do we, as humanity, actually know about our oceans and seas, and other bodies of water? Humanity has definitely been reliant on the ocean since the very beginning. The oldest discovered canoe originates from between 8,200 to 7,600 BCE, and we were likely making boats long before that. But way back then, we didn't know nearly as much about the ocean as we do now. And without the invention of sophisticated diving apparatus, humans didn't even know what life was like in the deep. Certainly, people did have a guess or two about what the ocean contained. Maybe at the center of the ocean, there was a giant monster with stretching tentacles, a gaping mouth, and 7 pairs of eyes, or a colony of merfolk living a peaceful life under the sea. There were sea monsters stretching for miles around the bottom of the ocean, with fluorescent green scales and snake-like red eyes. Or maybe deep down in the ocean was a portal to another dimension, filled with aliens and space travel. Or maybe the ocean was home to a group of magnificent mythical beasts, with hundreds of eyes and fins bigger than buildings. Perhaps there were even animals who could fly through the water, like birds through the sky. And maybe deep within the ocean, there were even monsters feeding off of people lost at sea, who could swallow sunken ships whole. The ocean was like an imaginary treasure chest. In it, we stored our strangest hopes and dreams, and nightmares. Now, with more advanced technology and sophisticated diving capabilities, humans know that our ocean isn't filled with vengeful ghosts or evil sirens. But maybe our ocean is even better than we thought it had been. There are whales whose tongues can weigh more than elephants, schools of fish that are worth rainbows of colors, the strangest, most incredible creatures on our planet. Perhaps the ocean isn't exactly what we expected it to be, but now that we can see it with our own eyes, it's even better. And remember, we still don't know all of the ocean's secrets, and scientists and marine biologists learn more every day.
Like any sane person, I began diving in warm water. It was the Bay Islands just north of Honduras. The problem was my dive instructor was Norwegian. His name was Stefan Olsen, and under his tutelage, I began what would become my diving career. Little did I know that just a few years after getting certified, I would visit Stefan in his hometown of Trondheim, in Norway, in January. Which is a good idea if you like to go skiing. But the first thing Stefan said was, "Hey, would you like to get in the water?" So pretty much it's his fault I'm a cold water diver. There is more to the story though, because back when Stefan was teaching my open water course, there was a young woman taking the class alongside me. At the time, we thought it was cool that we were both playwrights, never knowing that we would both go on to pursue careers in marine biology. So I'm going to let Michelle tell you who she is, what she does, and introduce you to yet another cold water diver, this time of the marine mammal variety.
Hi, my name's Michelle Fournet. I'm a PhD student at Oregon State University working towards my degree in wildlife science. And I am an acoustic ecologist by training. That means that I use sound to investigate how animals, usually marine mammals like whales and seals, to see how marine mammals interact with the world and how marine mammals interact with each other. Sound for marine mammals is really important because they spend, if not all of their time, then most of their time underwater where light doesn't travel very far. They instead use their listening skills and their vocalizing skills to communicate and to interpret the world. So in the same way that humans use their eyes to examine the environment or to wave to a friend to say hello, to learn things, we look around to learn things. Well, most marine mammals listen, and sound is their primary sensory modality for communication. And there are very few places and very few species that this is more obvious in than Weddell seals. So in my travels, I was privileged enough to spend a month in Antarctica, and I was down in the Ross Sea in eastern Antarctica, and I was there to recover 4 hydrophones. Now, hydrophones are underwater microphones, and we had them sitting at the bottom of the ocean doing nothing but listening for years. So for 24 hours a day, our hydrophones are listening to the sound of earthquakes, ice quakes, wind, waves, seals, whales, animals. And when I went down to recover these hydrophones, I had the chance to see the creatures for the first time that were producing all of these amazing sounds that I've been fortunate enough to listen to. Antarctica is vast and isolated, and I've been to some isolating places before, but when I first set foot off of that boat and saw nothing but white, 180, 360 degrees around me, nothing but white, I realized that I was in fact at the bottom of the earth. And to find amidst all of that white these speckles of gray and black, and then to approach them and to see they weren't speckles at all, but 600-pound, 700-pound animals basking in the sun on top of the ice. And Weddell seals typically vocalize underwater. They have a whole suite of vocalizations. They produce quite a few. But they also occasionally produce these sounds on ice. So the first Weddell seal that I saw, as I approached it, keeping a good distance so as not to disturb it, I could hear that it was vocalizing. It was producing this alien, otherworldly sound right there on top of the ice. And Weddell seals produce sounds for a lot of reasons: to communicate with their pups, to communicate with their moms, to communicate with other members of their breeding colony. Certainly males produce sounds allegedly to attract females, possibly to repel other males. They rely on these sounds really heavily for basic life functions like breeding. But to be there and to see this seal with a smile on its face on top of this ice in this white world producing this alien sound, it was very hard to imagine that we were actually still on this planet. And Weddell seals can only be found in Antarctica. It's the only part of the world that they live. But there's several populations. There's populations in the Weddell Sea, obviously, but there's also populations in the Ross Sea and in other areas. And similar to humans who have regional dialects, I, for example, sound different than somebody from Great Britain, who in turn sounds different from somebody from Australia, even though we might all be speaking the same language. Weddell seals also exhibit regional dialects. So if you were to drop a hydrophone and eavesdrop on the ocean, you could hear and identify not just the species of seal, but you could also identify which population of seal. And then potentially, if we learned enough, you could also identify if it was a young seal, if it was a male seal. And all of a sudden, these sounds, which before were just strange sounds, become information. And when we have information, we have ability. Antarctica is different. The oceans are getting louder. There's boats everywhere. At the bottom of the deepest part of the darkest ocean, you can still hear people. But there are times and places in Antarctica where you can't, when there are no boats, and you hear nothing at all except for the sounds of the natural world. And that means that when we study the vocalizations of creatures like Weddell seals, what we're getting is a picture into life without people, nature intended. And if we can identify the structure of these calls and how these animals use them now, as the world changes, and it is changing, as the sea ice melts, as the boats come in, it gives us something against which to compare future vocalizations of Weddell seals to see, are they adapting? Are they resilient? Can they succeed in a changing ocean, in a changing soundscape? And so understanding how Weddell seals communicate now provides us with important tools for preserving these animals and the sounds they make in the future. So it is a real gift to be able to go and listen to them. And passive acoustics is an exceptional tool because we can eavesdrop and we don't change the behavior of our study species at all. So if you're trying to understand how an animal communicates, you can do so without bothering it, without altering it, without changing its behavior. When you come into view of a seal or a whale, you change it. It sees you. These are sentient beings. They're aware of our presence, which means that they react to us. But if you can listen from far away and without actually being there, you get these clues into what life under the ocean is like for these acoustically oriented species without changing them at all. Those are the gifts that we get from putting hydrophones in places like Antarctica and in the Arctic and anywhere in the world's oceans. But certainly when you have a study species as charismatic as the Weddell seal and producing a vocalization that's just that strange, it makes the work that I do extremely satisfying.
Weddell seals sound just like what your mind's eye thinks of as far as aliens, in that it's kind of this eerie extraterrestrial sci-fi fusion that is a lovely marine mammal just saying hello, but it sounds like almost not quite like that, but the sheer range of sounds from these animals is really spooky because the reverberations can travel so far you more than likely won't even see it. But it kind of starts out at these really low, quiet frequencies and then spike up to really loud, high frequencies. And so it kind of starts to play tricks on your chilled out brain because you're like, what's out there? What is it saying? What does it all mean?
It really does sound like something on a Star Trek. Or spaceship. Like, I kid you not. It's the first time I ever heard it. Like, what is that? I have no idea what that is. But yeah, it's weird. I mean, it's amazing that an animal creates that kind of noise.
Do your best impression of a Weddell seal.
Yeah.
Yeah. It does like a. Are you? Yeah. Go ahead. You can go, and then I'll try.
It's kind of like.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. It does these little low chugs. It just. And then this is really high pitched. Like, I can't even do it. Like it. Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yes.
I would like to thank Kaitlin Webster and Robert Alexander for lending us their frozen perspective. Acoustic ecologist Michelle Fournet for her insights into the sounds and lives of the Weddell seals, and special thanks to Charlotte Fisher and teacher Tom Szymanski at the Walt Disney Magnet School in Chicago. And lastly, to our producer Eric Wehrmeister and editor Andy Gettings for their good work. And we will see you next time with more stories from the saltwater.
Hi, this is Nunzio Chevarez from Atlanta. Meet the Ocean is a listener-supported project. All donations help to further our educational outreach. You can find out ways to support the project, as well as art and photography for sale at meettheocean.com.